welcome back to Wednesday night sessions through KickstART Farmington. I am, as always, your host, Mitch Nobis. I think in some previous episodes, I just forgot to even say that, so hopefully we're putting that in the comments underneath this on YouTube. I believe these will land on YouTube, but you'll probably find it via Twitter or Facebook or something like that. We're lucky joining us today is Todd Kaneko. Actually, Todd, did I pronounce your last name right?
It's Kaneko, but I'll answer to whatever.
Yeah, I'm very sorry. I usually ask that beforehand. My bad. So we're lucky to have Todd Kaneko with us today. He's going to do a reading for us here in a minute. I will let him introduce himself, but I do think it's worth pointing out the short, goofy anecdote that Todd and I met via Twitter when I made a dumb joke. Kelly Russell Agadon said that the pandemic has made the poets cranky. And I said, well, the upside is the Cranky Poets would be a good band name. Kind of a hacky joke, but I meant it this time. Like I would actually, like sight unseen, I would go see a band called the Cranky Poets. Like they could be ska, I don't care, whatever. I would go see the Cranky Poets. And then Todd turned it into an awesome series of t-shirts as a fundraiser for Artists Relief. So thank you for doing that, Todd. That was very cool. I also want to point out that Todd has a book coming out soon. This is How the Bone Sings. So we will put some links to that and whatnot in the comment section when this rolls out. All right, with that, I'm going to toss it over to Todd to do a reading for us. Thank you, Todd.
Thank you, Mitch. Thank you for inviting me to do Wednesday night sessions. I think I read out in Farmington a long time ago, a few years back when Dwayne Hayes was running the series. Hi, Dwayne. It's good to be back. I have this brand new book, like Mitch said. It's called This Is How the Bone Sings. And the book is about my family's incarceration at a concentration camp in Idaho during World War II. My dad, and his parents were all there. And so the book is about that. It's about being a dad. It's about sort of the legacy of that experience. How does it transfer from my grandparents to my father, to me, and to my son, who is still grappling with what that really means. So I'm going to read a few poems from that book. We'll see how this goes. The first poem, I remember I got a comment on the manuscript a long time ago. The comment was, people just don't know what Minidoka is. Minidoka is the name of that concentration camp. So this poem is called Minidoka Was a Concentration Camp in Idaho. I'm afraid that all my ancestors have gathered my words like birds collect hair from the dead for nesting. An abundance of silence, whole spools of it, ready to tether me to the trees. I'm a new father, too young for ghost stories, too fresh to remember what it was like to shiver out on the prairie. I see my own breath sometimes when my son cries at nights. He doesn't have to describe those things he fears in the dark because my grandmother told me the world will never be safe for us when she refused to say the name of that place we come from. Minidoka, I say to him, and my ancestors lay fingers across my lips. Do not be ashamed because we are alive, because the birds will one day pluck us clean. One of the metaphors that I use in the book is ogres and witches. I just remember as a kid how monstrous old people were to me. Particularly my grandparents, I was not close to them. And so when I'd see them, they'd be these old people that I didn't really know, that I was expected to sort of hang out with. They say, this is how the ogres lived. When the war breaks, you're glad it's not you exiled to the Badlands where forest gives way to boneyard. But then you awaken in that rickety town assembled by goblins. These are the days when a man must contain a storm in his belly, a sad song pressed tight against his uvula. These are the days of men squinting at the weather, at their reflections, fighting for space in broken windows. These are epochs for beasts, prowling like house cats. Dusty paw prints, their only hint of sorrow. All that remains here are the ribs left for carnivorous spirits. All that is gone belongs to the cathedrals of night. An old man in a cage worries for the echoes of home, for the fences that still mark him as subhuman. He drinks from the bottle, feral now that he has been tamed. He sits you on his knee and sings, "Boy, let me tell you what it means to be a monster." This is We Sleep Like Horses. When I dream, I see an open meadow from my father's living room windows. The house drained of color, except for the dissolved night. A flash of fire, an angel's mane, untamed for the first time since suffering a gash of spurs. When my father dreams, he gallops through the ocean, hooves pounding the beach like a pair of fists, his father's fists, against that spot where the moon leaves a zag of sky on the carpet each evening. Those things I know in the dark are just between me and the empty stables of nights, between me and all those emptied houses I cannot remember while conscious. When the body is this quiet, the heart may roam where it desires. So why can't we close the blinds? Relish the darkness. Why can't we open all our windows so the birds might fly inside? This is a poem that my poetry group had a prompt that was to write a ghost story. So this is called Ghost Story. 1. A child walks through a closed door. 2. Not a child, but everyone in my family, all walking all the time without seeing where we've come from. 3. Everyone in my family is dead, except for those who are still alive. Amen. Amen. To bring the dead back to us. 4. My grandmother is no longer alive. She tells me stories at night about Minidoka, about Idaho. Amen. Amen. 5. My grandfather's no longer alive, and he tells me stories about my grandmother. Amen. Amen. They say this is how the lioness was turned into a witch. They say there's no such thing as magic. Amen. Amen. 6. My father is no longer alive, and he tells me stories about life in a concentration camp. They say this is how life is breathed into a body. Amen. Amen. How it feels to be out of breath. 7. One day the child will grow up and tell me a story about Idaho, how my family learned to pray, how in the end, no one remembers how to pray. 8. One day the door will open and so many stories spill forth. They say this is where our hearts are buried. They say this is how the crows learned our names. They say Minidoka over and over again so that my family can finally sleep. 9. There is no child. There is no door. One day my son will ask me where we come from. Amen. Amen. And no one will be there to tell us the answer. I had a teacher in undergrad once who told me a story about a pilgrimage a group of Minidoka survivors made. A pilgrimage they made out to the remains of where the camp are. And they said that had this story about how the crows were out all over that day and they were super noisy. And so they started this thing where they just started reading the names of all the internees who had died since the war. And as they read the names, the crows would become quieter and quieter. And as they read the very last name, the crows went silent. I thought that was a cool story. I don't know if it's true, but I believe it. This story is called Pilgrims. This poem's called Pilgrims. I hope to take my son one day to Idaho, where our family learned silence in that ramshackle town we call Minidoka when no one is listening. We will look for the outline of our family's barracks in the dirt, a line of stones, a strip of rotted wood. Today I told a story to my son about that pilgrimage to Minidoka, where the crows gathered as the names of the dead were recited, caws and cackles louder and louder until the last name was uttered. Then morning air, prairie hush. In the night, my son sometimes calls my name until I go to him, like he's afraid I'll forget where he is. We all have words we say for unearthly ears. Call them prayers, secrets, vows. We all have those words. And sometimes I say my father's name in the dark and hope the birds will sing his name back to me. Two more poems. This one is called Legacies of Camp. 1. The first rule in talking about camp is that we do not talk about camp. 2. Minidoka is a word we use for camp. Relocation is a fancy way of talking about internment. Camp, a polite word for prison. Minidoka. 3. The cage is the skeleton for grief, grief the mantle worn by shame, shame the fuel for a tone-deaf heart. 4. They say this is where the witch burned, where the ogre lost his heart. Sing a real song for imaginary creatures. Keep it simple so the ghosts can sing along. 5. Men bruised by sticks, men pummeled by stones, men disintegrated by wind, men gashed to pieces by wild animals, men shredded by flights of dark birds, men evaporating into morning. 6. What turns kings into beasts, princesses into crones hungry for dusk? How do we lose our ancestors, still living in barren houses next door? What do horses dream about, buttressed by the rigor mortis of night? Remember, we do not talk about camp. 7. The second rule. There are no trick questions, only bear traps, poised silent, and hope that someone's going to talk about camp. 8. The cage houses the heart of the ogre the glamour bewitching the wilderness. We live at the fringe of awful desire, that ragged edge of twilight where the ocean devours the shore. Remember the cage. 9. They say those ruins are nearly swallowed by the Idaho scrubland. I've seen ruins posing as old men on bar stools, women cloaked in thorns and shark's teeth, and we do not talk about ruins. 10. Men who smoke in restaurants, men who try to quit smoking, men who try to quit smoking for their children, men who smoke only when drinking, men who smoke with the car windows rolled up, men who smoke in secret places, men who never knew that they were on fire. 11. The cage shelters us from despair, the ocean lapping at our knees, fear, the eels wriggling electric on the incoming tide. The cage holds everything we do not talk about. 12. Third rule, do not speak. Listen to buzzards pasted against every sunset, to alley cats yowling lonesome in the glow of night. That is a soliloquy of ruin. This is the hush of mushrooms on fallen trees. 13. Stories are tiny prisons built to house our secrets. We live in cages still. My grandmother's legs remain bound by barbed wire. My grandfather's tongue lay caked in dust. Everyone is dead. It was goddamn camp. We can't talk about it. This is the last poem. It's a poem for my son. Thanks again, Mitch, for having me. This poem is called Birthright. Tomorrow, you will ask, where is Minidoka? I will finish my beer and say nothing except it's where you left it. My father will say Idaho, but his mother will say it's right here. Everyone in our house knows how easy it is to bring back the dead, how an answer gnaws its way through a boy's guts and bursts from his throat, a wolf's howl, a carnivorous question posed to the sky about where we live, about who else still lives. At night, I will place my hand on your forehead and feel the antelope you pursue with your eyes closed. They're outside the window now, listening for your answer. Thanks.
Thank you, Todd. Those were amazing.
Sorry, that was heavy. It's kind of a heavy topic, and
I assume it's going to be a heavy book, right? I mean, I
think so.
Not an easy subject matter, and I love how you pointed out at the beginning, like so many people don't even know about it. You know, I've taught at the K-12 level for years and years, and it's astounding how little it's discussed, you know, that people can get to, you know, 10th, 11th, 12th grade and never know that there were concentration camps within the United States.
Yeah, that there are concentration camps, right, within the United States.
Yep, exactly. Well, it's always weird to record these because, like, as I was telling Todd before we hit record, I always like mute and hide myself to save bandwidth. But rest assured, between poems, I'm like doing that audience reader at a reading thing. I'm like, wow, like they're quiet, like, ooh. So it feels weird to, like, you know, watching you read in silence, but rest assured your audience is responding. Those are very powerful poems, and I look forward to the book. I have it on pre-order. So
thank you. Maybe you should have like a poetry reading laugh track, right? Instead of laughter, you just have that sound, an audible group, oh, and then everyone, right? Everyone knows what to do.
The awe track with like the snaps track, you know.
Yeah.
Goals, something for future episodes, maybe season 2. All right. Well, we do a quick 2-question interview at Wednesday night sessions here. Mm-hmm. And the first one, since you have a book coming out, I'm always kind of fascinated by books like as projects. Like, what's the story of the book itself? And you've kind of alluded to what it's about, but tell us about this, like, as a project. Like, how long were you working on it? How did it all come together? It's coming out through Black Lawrence Press, so we know the end story, but what led to that?
So, I mean, the poems, it's weird. My dad died a few years ago, and this is the book that I really wanted him to read. He's read some of the poems. He's not read all the poems because a lot of them were written after he passed. With the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II, a lot of families, my family was no different from many families, we just didn't talk about it. You know, people were ashamed because they were there. They were ashamed because they went along and just went to camp. There's a lot of shame, a lot of guilt associated with being incarcerated for all those years. So in great part, I wanted to write these poems to sort of fill that silence, with something, right? It's not my story to tell. It's my family's story to tell, but somehow that story of silence is my story. So I feel like this is what the book is trying to do. I started writing these poems a long time ago. I think I wrote the poems, a bunch of poems, and I put a manuscript together called This Is How the Bone Sings, and I sent it out, and it was a finalist and semi-finalist at, you know, some of the usual places. And some people would say, that just means it's going to come out. That means it's ready, right? But then I saw another writer, I think it was Andrew Munson, who said, talking about one of his books, and he said that, you know, I had this manuscript, he was the same boat. He says, I had this manuscript and it was a finalist, but no one ever wanted to publish it. So I decided maybe it's not good enough yet. And so shelved it and continued working on it. So that's what I did. I shelved it for 3 years, 4 years, and it just sat on my hard drive where I wouldn't have to look at those poems, and just continued writing more poems on this subject. And then I think it was like 2 summers ago, I just pulled them all out and said, well, let's see what we got here. Let's see if we can make a book. I did the whole thing, spread them out on the floor. The manuscript that I have now is probably only about 30% of those original poems. The rest of them are new. The whole thing has been reconstructed. I sent it to Black Lawrence many, many years ago as part of their contest, and it did not win. They did not want to publish it. But when I submitted the open reading period last summer, I got a phone call, and people don't call you unless it's a yes. So I was very excited. I'm real happy that the book is now going to come out with Black Lawrence, and they've been really, really great to work with. So that's sort of the writer journey. I know that maybe, I'm not sure if that was really the question you're asking, but it's part of the story that I think is important, that, you have a book and you believe in it and people are like, oh, it's ready. And it's tough to say, okay, maybe it's not ready, right? Maybe I do have to re-examine the material, the layout, the organization, and see, well, why isn't someone wanting to publish it, even if it's not winning a contest, right? So that was a hard lesson, but it was humbling, and I learned a lot from doing that. I guess I feel comfortable doing it again. Yeah. I don't want to do it again, but.
Well, and you said it, you don't know if that's the question. That was kind of exactly the question, because I'm always fascinated by these backstories, because people, you see the book. Writing is so mysterious. Like you just see the book and yay, here's a book. And if you have not tried to write a book, or if you don't work in publishing or anything like that, it's just a total mystery. I don't think people realize like the journey that is any book project, how long it takes. With poetry especially, it's just sort of wacky, because people have no idea about this. Like, yeah, you throw $20-25 at somebody for them just to read it, and they're going to read 1,000 other manuscripts. So like the odds of your book getting published are just wildly slim. It's almost like making it to the NBA or something. It's harder than I think people realize. So I always love hearing people's stories about the journey of the book, and how it often takes years and years and years.
I mean, it's about 10 years of poems. I mean, I started writing about 10 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
So probably about 2009 is when I actually started writing about, poems about camp. But, it was a long process. The Dead Wrestler, my first book was like a year and a half, right? And I just like jammed those poems out. So, I mean, it depends, right? On the project, depends on the poem, depends on the reader, depends on the publisher, so much, right? It's just because your book doesn't get published, I think that doesn't mean that it's not a good book. It's the market is so weird, unpredictable and unfair, really.
Yeah, I mean, the longer, I don't have a book out yet, but I've been shopping it around and entering contests and stuff, and I've made my peace with the random wild luck aspect of the whole thing.
Yeah.
And what you said, like, it was first a semifinalist like 2 or 3 years ago, and I have completely retooled the manuscript since then. Like that, it should not have won that contest. Like, in hindsight, I'm very grateful that they liked it enough to name it a semifinalist, because it was not publishable yet. Like it's a journey. Like that's really the best word I can think for the amount of time you have to comb through and edit and reorder. Like I love you said, like, they'll print it out and put them on the floor. Like, yeah, I did that again just a few months ago with this manuscript of mine, like covered the table with, I try to print them small with safe paper, right? So it's like little half or quarter size poems, just all dotted over the table.
Like the last time I did that, my son comes home and he goes, "Why is this room a mess? We should clean this up."
He's not wrong. Like, yeah, it's a mess. Yeah. It is. Awesome. All right. Well, my second question is usually something a little goofier. So if you folks do not follow Todd on Twitter, you might not know that he's also into professional wrestling. And so I want to know if you could make a buddy road trip movie, a buddy film, got to be a road trip also. It's you and any professional wrestler. Which professional wrestler do you want to make a buddy road trip movie with?
There's this documentary called Beyond the Mat, right? And it's this awesome documentary where they just go behind the scenes and they travel with these wrestlers, and there's this great commentary track that there's on the DV. There's an alternate commentary where the filmmaker is giving you the backstory, and he says there was this time where he was on the road with Jake the Snake Roberts, and well, first of all, another wrestler said, whenever a wrestler calls you brother, don't believe a word they say, right? So if I call you brother, don't believe a word they're saying. And so he was like driving Jake the Snake Roberts around. They pull into a gas station, and Jake says, I want a soda. Go in and get me a soda. And the guy says, okay, I'll go. And Jake says, just leave the keys here so I can listen to the radio. And the guy looks at Jake the Snake, who's been strung out, who at the time was strung out on drugs and alcohol for years. He turns at Jake the Snake and he goes, Jake, are you going to take my car? And Jake looks at him and he goes, brother, I would never do that to you. I don't want to go on a road trip with a pro wrestler. I'll tell you that. Any pro wrestler would be, it's tough because I know some of my favorite wrestlers have reputations as being such horrible people to work with and to be around. And some of them are great people. I think I would say Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Partly because he was one of my dad's favorite wrestlers. I never really understood why he liked Ricky Steamboat. Ricky Steamboat, who was Hawaiian, one of the only Asian American men to ever hold a world championship in pro wrestling. But I think Ricky Steamboat, mostly because he was one of my dad's favorites. And he's one of those guys, like Ric Flair has a story. He says, he was out on the road. He left his kids and his family at home and went on the road. And he said, I had two choices. I could go out on the road and be the best wrestler in the world, or I could go out on the road and still not see my family and not be the best wrestler in the world. And so I went on the road, and, he's one of the best ever to wrestle. But Steamboat actually, he got married, started a family, asked for time off. He abdicated the Intercontinental Championship at the time. And nonetheless, we still look at him as sort of one of the best of all time. So it's not an exciting answer, but I think it's my answer.
It's a great answer. I think he was one of my favorites, when I was younger, and I don't think he gets the credit, right? Because like Hulk Hogan's eating up 90% of the camera time, and even in whatever that would have been, 1988, like he wasn't getting the camera time he deserved. He was a talented wrestler, but also a good character, because they're kind of playing roles also. So yeah, I think it's a great answer. I like that one. All right. Well, thank you very much, Todd, for joining us today. Again, look for his book. This is How the Bone Sings, coming out soon, right? September?
It should be out this month. I mean, I'm looking at proofs now, and and looking at interior proofs now, and it looks like it's going to be ready. So hopefully it'll be very soon.
Awesome. All right. Well, keep your eyes peeled for that, viewers. And thanks again, Todd, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Mitch, for having me.
Absolutely. All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Take care, everyone. See you next time.
All right.